The 50-day ultimatum is silly. It shows a great amount of weakness and a large amount of panic. Who do you think the ultimatum's actually for? Is it for Putin or is it for Trump himself? There's a huge blind spot culturally with Russia, and it hinders our ability to negotiate with them properly. Trump is very hesitant to pull the trigger, and we're already in World War III, but it will definitely trigger a hot, kinetic World War III. Something is about to break. They are planning on something very large within the next month or so, and that could also be why he announced that ultimatum. But I think that the war is mostly on your psyche, and the war starts to get fought against you by the people that are actually in power. The government is telling you, don't believe what your eyes and ears are telling you. We're telling you that it's not that. This is like Newspeak 1984 type stuff. We're getting to a breaking point in the United States for sure.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel, we're joined by Sarah Bills, co-founder and geopolitical analyst at DD Geopolitics, an independent media collective that aggregates and analyzes global news across multiple platforms, including X, where they have 400,000 followers, as well as Telegram, YouTube, and Substack. Sarah is a former U.S. Navy veteran who cuts through the BS and gives a clear-eyed perspective on World War III, as I call it, as it unfolds. You know, Sarah, I heard you on Jamal Thomas, and you were talking about Iran, and you were giving a very clear-eyed view on the situation that a lot of people who are perhaps afraid or self-deluding or wearing the rose-colored glasses don't want to say. You were saying kind of the quiet part out loud, and I want to get to Iran, but it's so difficult for me to find a start-off point for this conversation because we have the 50-day ultimatum that was given to the Russians by Trump yesterday. We have things popping off in Syria. As somebody who is Russian speaking, maybe you can talk just briefly about your background, and I want to hear your thoughts on this 50-day ultimatum first, and then hopefully we'll get into the Middle East stuff. How does that sound?
Great. Well, my background, like you said, I served for 13 years in the United States military. After I retired while I was still in the military, I went back to school with a focus on political science with I guess a focus on Eastern European fascism. Now, this was before the SMO actually broke out. And I was writing and studying about actually Ukrainian and other Slavic fascisms during the interwar period, not modern day fascism. And then the war broke out. And I took a very strong interest. I have family from that region. I've always been interested in the Donbass. I don't know if you remember, but Vice News, when it was cool, used to do documentaries about them. So I was very interested in Donbass. My father knows about it. And I've always been interested in politics. I find as a female, girls love gossip, right? But politics is gossip that matters. Like geopolitics is gossip that matters. So I find that incredibly interesting. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background, and we've kind of just evolved from the SMO. And doing this, I've really learned how interconnected everything really is, and I think that's something that people consistently miss. And I try to point that out as often as possible. That's what I think you're alluding to from the Jamal Thomas show is kind of. But the 50-day ultimatum is silly. I'm not really sure what Trump's doing with Russia. It was interesting because when the peace talks started and they were kind of not really manifesting anything, our Russian analysts on our team said the Russians are using this to let the Americans sort of hang themselves. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And then we get to here, and you can tell that Trump just kind of doesn't know what to do with the Russians. So we're to a 50-day limit on, and then to 100% tariffs, but we don't import anything from Russia to tariff. So that's kind of how strange.
Well, the tariffs are on the Chinese and the people who import oil and gas from Russia. Right?
And that's another point. Once you begin doing, once you begin doing secondary sanctions, that's a really bad sign that you're not really in control of the situation. If now you're disciplining the people that are doing business with the person under sanctions, that's that's actually a very bad sign politically speaking. It shows a great amount of weakness and a large amount of panic. So that's actually even worse.
So you think Trump doesn't really, I'm very reluctant to say Trump at all because I think that this transcends precedents. I think this is an issue that is a continuity of agenda, regardless of who really enters into the office. So I'd really like to hear your perspective on what forces you believe are moving us in this direction, because it appeared as though back in, I can't remember what date it was, but we had Zelensky was almost physically removed from the White House. And now we've done a complete 180. And all of a sudden, Trump has issued an ultimatum, which is somewhat tantamount to a declaration of a war against not just Russia, but other countries as well who are, dependent on Russia commodities.
Well, this is a foreign policy disaster, and I do agree with you. It absolutely transcends Trump. I'm a very big proponent of saying, the domestic policy, we vote on domestic policy in the United States. We don't really vote on foreign policy. The foreign policy never really changes. It hasn't changed since the end of the Cold War. So this has been kind of it wasn't an inevitable outcome, but there was a collision course that the United States has sort of put itself on since the 90s, and it kind of never did what it could have done to take itself off this collision course. In the 90s, there was a huge issue in the intelligence community that there was a blind spot in China, and they were worried that they would have another one in Russia. Now I'm looking at this administration, and I think that that's true. Even with the last administration, I don't think that the Biden admin was any better at this. I think there's a huge blind spot culturally and sociologically with Russia, and it hinders our ability to negotiate with them properly. They don't talk the same way as us. They don't act the same way as us, and things don't have the same meaning to them as they mean to us. For them, this is our wars are fought for natural resources. Our wars are fought for quote unquote humanitarian purposes. For Russia, this war is being fought for an existential reason, and for NATO and against NATO. And Americans can't really grasp that. I think that falls short. And so I think I agree 100% with you that this absolutely transcends Donald Trump. I think that he's an accelerationist, though. And I think that this is going a lot faster than I thought it would.
Yeah. And I mean, I kind of suspected that before he even took office, and I lost a lot of followers as a result of this. I said that, there's a very high likelihood that once Trump and Putin reach an impasse, that things were going to accelerate. Because, once the whole facade of political niceties had dissipated and had run its course in terms of its utility to kind of string each other along, ultimately you're going to have a clash of titans. And so that's what we're seeing right now. So people are interpreting this 50-day ultimatum in different ways. I personally think it's quite serious. And what's so serious about it is even under Biden, there wasn't such ultimatums given. And this is what I think people need to comprehend, is that there was never any specific and pointed date given. And in light of what we recently seen with the Ayatollah's letter and what Margarita Simonian, and you guys tweeted this or retweeted it, and she said that basically interpreting Lindsey Graham's what essentially was a threat to the Russian leadership. And Margarita Simonian, for people who don't know, I think she's the editor-in-chief at RT,
Yes.
Russia Today. And so she said the following in response to Lindsey Graham's, what essentially was a threat on Vladimir Putin's life. So the U.S. is going to hold fake talks, then try to assassinate our negotiators and bomb our capital through a proxy anyway. So it sounds like they're interpreting this as Lindsey Graham is basically explicitly stating it. Do you think that that's what's happening here, that we're going to see another, what do you think is going to happen after this 50-day period?
I'm not sure. And I was actually going to bounce it back to you and say, who do you think the ultimatum's actually for? Is it for Putin or is it for Trump himself? Because I feel like Putin or Trump is very hesitant to pull the trigger. I think there's this odd, maybe he looks up to Putin a little bit. I mean, I would if I were Trump, but I don't know. I think there's a hesitancy to pull the trigger because if you pull the trigger with Russia, that severs ties with a lot of things. at the same time, and it will cause a very huge domino effect that will definitely trigger a kinetic World War III. In my opinion, we're already in World War III, but it will definitely trigger a hot kinetic World War III. So I think he's very much hesitant. I actually just asked my co-founder and some of the people on my team what they thought about the 50-day ultimatum, and they all said, and I agree with you. I think it's serious. I think at the end of the 50 days, Trump's required to act. He has to do something. But my colleagues all said, we're not even thinking about it. We don't think that
Yeah.
anything's going to happen.
To me,
And
that's kind of dangerous because I think a lot of people had that same point of view with the letter to the Ayatollah. Even I kind of brushed it off as, taco, right? But, we've seen what happened there. So you're right. He has to do something in response to this. And he's really set the bar pretty high in terms of what he now has to do, which makes me think that there's forces behind him. And like you said, this perhaps is an ultimatum for Trump himself, that are saying that, that are pushing him in this direction. Like, why do such a 180 from what we've seen with the falling out in the White House with Zelensky to where we're at right now? Like, I mean, he could have walked away. So who is it that is moving him in this direction?
now, what happened when I noticed a change of tone, maybe you noticed the same, is when Putin kind of announced, we have all the lithium now. And then the tone where we had the majority of the lithium, the lion's share, to where whatever is left really is inconsequential. And I noticed the tone shift then. I'm not very BlackRock centered. I don't know a whole lot about that sector, but from what I can understand from people that do know about that sector is that BlackRock wants that lithium. Everybody wants that lithium in that country for the AI energy race that they're all now in. We're in a new space race apparently with artificial intelligence. It's so silly, but they need the energy to produce it, so they need the lithium for the batteries. So a lot of people say that's behind it. Apparently, Gulf Arabs have a lot of interest in Ukraine, so they're behind it as well. They've just done, and I like that you asked the question, who's actually moving this? I 100% don't agree. I don't believe it's Trump, just like your question kind of insinuated. Trump family doesn't have much interest in the Ukraine. They never really have. This is somebody else that's definitely motivating this.
What do you make
Sort of.
of the rumors that Melania is somehow, perhaps you heard about that she is the
I
one who has turned the tide on this?
I'd be surprised because Slovenians are very averse to war. And having been through two, I mean, my co-founder is a Slovenian in Slovenia. And I also don't think she gets that involved with this stuff. I don't know. I'm not buying it. I think this is a
Yeah.
desperate attempt to get Melania just sort of involved. People playing fan fiction, sort of.
Right, right. So what do you think Russia's goal is then? Like, is there a possibility that within this 50 days, Russia could achieve its goals and stop the fighting?
I don't know if they could do that in the next 50 days. Russia had planned from the beginning for a 5 to 10 year war. Now Europe is saying 2 years from now. I think that sounds about right. But in your question, they are planning on something very large, within the next month or so, and that could also be why he announced that ultimatum. I don't know if you remember, but it was a week or two ago. He was asked on a tarmac somewhere. I'm not sure he's always on a tarmac, but he was
Yeah.
asked, "What do you think about the 50,000 troops, Russian troops that are amassing at the border at Sumy?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know anything about it." And then after that, the tone shifted again. So now he's kind of understanding, like, you're kind of busy with your, I don't even know, your Epstein Israel thing. We're going to go do this offensive. And there's a huge troop buildup at the border. And Putin has said more than once that he wants and believes that they need a buffer zone in Sumy. And so I think that that's also, there might be an offensive that intelligence knows about in this time period as well, that they're seeing what happens there. So I would expect to see a lot of movement on the Russian side in the next month. Absolutely. They always do a summer offensive, but this one is looking to be quite large, quite large.
It seems like it's getting a little late in summer for them to be starting this, isn't it? Or
August, July. It's fine for now. The rainy season will start in October, but yeah, it's Sumi. It's a different climate. It's not as wet.
Right.
Yeah, they should be starting it any day now. I mean, they've been bombing the crap out of Kiev, Sumy, Poltava, all of these central and western locations. So they're going to get ready to move in soon, I
So
would think.
essentially, there's a gap that between what is it like Lugansk and the Belarusian border. Like we don't have, we could put a map up here, but that's the gap that they want to have a buffer zone in.
Yeah, there's a gap between Lugansk. It's like Kharkiv, Sumy, that area,
Right.
and there they want a buffer in there.
So are they
And
wanting
that's
to
to
take?
protect Kursk and Belgorod. That's to protect the Russian border towns and border settlements.
Do you think that will entail taking Kharkov?
I don't know. The last time I spoke to Russians about this specifically wasn't that long ago, and they think that the actual city of Kharkiv would be too difficult to hold on to. The people are very gotten a little bit of animosity towards the Russians since this has kind of gone on. You know, you have these border towns of Kursk and Kharkiv, and they're both kind of very mixed in Ukrainian Russian. Kursk is more Russian, and Kharkiv used to be, but a lot of those Russians left to go to Russia. And now, since the fighting has gone on, it's become a little bit more polarized. So I don't know. I think that at this point, it's up in the air with Kharkiv. I think in the beginning, they would have been more inclined to take it. And now they think that that might have changed a bit.
There must have been a lot of people that have fled from there by now, though. Like a lot of the maybe you still have some loyalists there, but could it be that the people who remain are kind of ambivalent about what side they're on?
They are. There's a lot of older people in Kharkiv that were unable to move, but it's also become a hub for Ukrainian intelligence and sort of propaganda networks and stuff like that because of its proximity to the border. But yeah, there's a lot of people in Ukraine, especially in the central and western places that are indifferent, that kind of just want it to stop and they don't really mind which side they wind up on. But yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about a buffer zone, and what about, Kherson, Zaporozhye? What about all these places? Are they going to go all the way to the river? Or I guess what I'm trying to figure out is whether or not you think that in 50 days they're going to be able to, what sort of, how far do you think they're going to be able to get? And would it be sufficient? Because they have acquired a sizable territory. Not perhaps what they initially set out to do with the four oblasts, but to put on the rose-colored glasses, I could perhaps see a situation where, maybe they say, okay, it's going to be a Cold War from here on in, left, first, right side of the Dnieper River. We might as well just dig our heels in here. Or is that just an opportunity for NATO to rearm to such an extent that it's going to pose an even greater risk down the road, and thus they need to deal with the situation now?
I think I love your outlook. I love your
No,
positivity.
no, that's not my real outlook. I'm
I
just
would
I'm
love.
playing the angel's advocate, I
I
guess.
guess you are. I mean, they're moving in Zaporozhye. That's undeniable. They're going to take more of Zaporozhye. Zaporozhye is already in the Russian camp. Lugansk was declared completely liberated the other day, so that oblast is done. Kherson will have to be done. It's not done yet. The issue is it depends on who you ask when we start to talk about the other, how much further it's going to go. You mentioned the river. I'd like to see them take more of Dnipropetrovsk, and I don't think that you win this war without having Odessa. And if you have to get Odessa, you have to take Nikolaev. So I don't think that they can do that in 50 days, but I think they could get themselves to a point where they are really comfortable in 50 days' time. But
When do you think this is? When do you think this is going to start? Then
any day. Any day now. Lavrov just left a meeting with the DPRK and China. And so I will wait to see what comes out of that. And then Kim actually offered more people for the border. So I guess this is going to begin soon.
Okay, I have a question about Odessa, but with respect to North Korea, what is their role in this offensive going to be, in your opinion?
I would agree. I would think that they would hold behind the border because Russia is very hesitant from getting other countries involved in the war inside Ukraine. They don't want to get that sort of get into that mess. So if in official capacity, they keep them out of Ukraine. So their role, and they have been instrumental in this, is keeping the the civilians in Kursk safe and keeping the Ukrainians out of the border. They're doing a lot of border guard stuff and insurgencies and stuff like that, keeping that stuff down. There's a lot of terrorism in that area now.
And I suppose that would trigger the civilian population to have North Koreans raiding the countryside.
Well, they're not raiding.
Wow, you know what I mean?
Well, there's
Invading,
Russians there too. I mean, it's not
liberating. Yeah,
a free for all of you North Koreans. But yeah, they're not going into Ukraine because they don't. That could have been an international relations disaster if North Koreans start like showing up to the doors of Ukrainian citizens.
right. I mean, I'm sure it's probably already happened in some form or another. But okay, so Odessa, this is the place where I hear that NATO is going to make its stand, potentially putting troops in there from Romania. Do you think there's any veracity to those claims?
Absolutely. We know that they've snuck French troops in there. We've known that they've snuck other European troops, not into Odessa. France was mostly in the north border towns. But since this recent, and this is where we get into the interconnectivity of everything, this recent election in Romania, which we covered to an extent with all of the corruption surrounding it and all of the this guy can't run, we want this guy to run, and then finally this guy that nobody liked won, and he's a Western guy. Well, the guy that was running that got kicked out of the election didn't want to be used in the war against Ukraine. He was highly against that. He was also against the building of the NATO base in Romania. Now this new guy is all for it. So that's how these things work. So yes, there is veracity to those claims. Again, there have been drone launches from Romania. There have been shipments that came through Romania. So yeah, I don't know how strong the Romanian army is, but they won't hesitate to utilize Romanian troops in that area.
Wow. Because that would be a direct involvement of NATO in the conflict. That would be a huge red line.
And they've been doing it. They've been doing it in some capacity for a very long time. They just don't. They might even be there now, and we don't know it. The Romanians, you just never know. I mean, Americans are there; they die all the time. The French are there; they were killed in large numbers. They're just
Right.
there's just nobody's talking about it.
Shadow war. Well, yeah, I mean, all these Patriot systems are likely going to have to be manned by NATO operators, I presume.
They are. Mhm.
Yeah. So, it's incredible to me that we're right now, 6 months into Trump's presidency, we have manned intelligence gathering planes in the Black Sea just off the coast of Sochi. While all this is going on, and you have now these veiled threats about doing deep strikes utilizing Tomahawk missiles and JASSM's missiles. This is something that people forget because it's so easy. So much has happened, since the election in the United States. People forget that, this is not supposed to be normal, this kind of talk. And we're now at a point where under Trump, we've normalized the potential for deep strikes into Russia with some of the most advanced NATO weapons systems. What do you think it's going to take to cross that line? And what do you think Russia is going to do? Because ultimately, I mean, people will just brush it off and be like, doesn't matter what the inflation rate is in Russia. It doesn't matter how many Russians die. It doesn't matter how much of their oil and gas industry is affected or destroyed or embargoed or sanctioned, that they can just endure anything. But eventually, they got to do something. Like, is it going to be another Orezhnik test? What is, what's going to be the big thing that they do to try to put the brakes on this escalation?
I don't know. I agree. And a lot of Russians agree with you as well. Most of the people's hang up with Putin. It's funny. In the West, they think Putin's a tyrant. In the East, most of the people's hang up with Putin is that he's not tyrannical enough and that he doesn't go far enough. They need to start hitting the decision-making centers. The other issue is they don't want to decapitate the Ukrainian regime. They want Zelensky to stay in there because he's an idiot. So when your enemy's making all these mistakes, don't get rid of him. But if you watch what they've started to bomb, I think this is really important. They've started to bomb oil refineries that are fueling Israel. They've started to bomb oil refineries that are fueling Azerbaijan inside of Ukraine. They've started to bomb oil refineries that hook up Turkey. So they're making moves inside of Ukraine that maybe people don't immediately recognize. They're doing things to kind of agitate in the other fronts as well without getting directly involved. So it's very interesting that they're being this strategic. I would love to see an Oreshnik strike, not a test, but a strike. I think they need to use a tactical nuke in Western Ukraine, but that's just me.
Yeah, like I mean, what do you think? On the topic of nuclear weapons, what do you think the likelihood of something like that happening is? And is there a certain threshold? Is there a real red line? We've heard about, Dmitry Medvedev's red line since I think his first red line was if any missile falls on Crimea or something like that. We're well removed from that now. The goalpost has been moved very far from that. What do you think is the red line for that? And is there a reason, perhaps, like I mean, like you say, Putin is a very strategic thinker. He's trying to perhaps triangulate against NATO allies, trying to perhaps force some sort of conflict of interest in the people that Ukraine serves elsewhere. What do you think the threshold is for this potential use of a nuclear weapon? Because ultimately, I know people say, well, they're never going to run out of weapons, and they're producing way more weapons than NATO. But now NATO's turning on the machines to start building weapons.
I don't think that. I think Putin will avoid using nukes on in-country targets at all costs. I don't think that that's something that Putin wants to do. I think that if he wanted to, or if those were accurate, then those red lines were accurate, we wouldn't want to see the outcome of that. I agree, though. I'm consistently asking, where's the red line? I thought this was a red line. I thought this was a red line. And most Russians just say, well, you know what? Be glad you haven't seen the red line yet. So I'm not sure. Russia's very good at controlled escalation, and Putin is a master at it. So I'm not sure, but no one talks about it outside of Russia at all. They don't talk about nuclear war or any of this stuff.
The implication is that if they were to use a nuke in Ukraine, which isn't a NATO country, that there would be some nuclear response from NATO. But that isn't even written in the NATO agreement that they have to, number one, come to the aid of Ukraine at all, much less use a nuclear weapon. So it's like there's this unwritten understanding that a nuclear use in Ukraine is going to initiate a chain reaction of events that will eventually lead to a full-blown nuclear war. Is that the thinking in Russia?
I don't think that they think that. I think that Russians. I don't think that Russia will use nukes in an offensive stand, in an offensive posture. It'll always be defensive. I don't think that they'll hit Ukraine with nukes only because of the fallout and what it could cause to the European community. And that all of that stuff in NATO and the NATO agreements is non-binding anyway. Even Article 5 is non-binding. They don't even have to respond to Article 5, which I think is just nuts. So I don't know. I just don't see how feasibly the West or NATO or anybody stops Putin or the Russians from doing whatever it is they're doing, even when they bomb Moscow. It has very little effect other than to make them accelerate a little bit more.
So you think that...
And Putin has also held off on the escalatory ladder a lot. There's still bridges that need to be blown up. There's still dams. They've held back a lot. So there's still a lot they can do in the infrastructure department.
So do you think that NATO is going to turn up the heat and make good on these threats to start attacking deeper into Russia with these more advanced weapon systems?
I hope not, but at the same time, these one-off missile strikes or drone strikes in these towns or oil refineries, they really don't do much to deter Russia or to damage the war machine that they have. I think there was an element of let's see if we can keep them on the hook long enough and kind of make them go broke in terms of Russia. That's not really working. And so I don't know that NATO has the wherewithal or the political will. That's the question that I always fall back on. Do they really want to fight Russia? I don't think that they really want to go to war with Russia. I think they're trying to avoid that at all costs. I also
Really?
don't see them as a
I don't
well,
know.
I mean, literal boots on the ground in country, NATO involvement, like coalition of the willing type thing. I think that they're afraid, honestly. I don't
Hmm.
think that they're avoiding it out of nicety. I think they're a little bit gun shy. I mean, the
Right.
war in Ukraine has been an insane war. That's like trench warfare or World War II Vietnam type warfare. That's not drones. That's not we go bomb some Yemenis and then we run away. It's not, it's just
Mhm.
so much different. And this isn't anything that they've trained for or seen since the 60s and 70s. Maybe the Yugoslav wars, but even those were so chaotic they weren't really organized. This is very serious warfare. This is like body count warfare.
Wow. Yeah, this is it's definitely very surreal, and it's unfortunate it's been normalized to the extent it has, where people really have kind of succumbed to fatigue with the issue, even though now I would say it's at a time where it's most critical in terms of what the ramifications for the rest of the world could be. Now, you talked about the relationship between Israel, and this is the confusing piece of the puzzle here, because there's a connection. We start connecting these dots geopolitically on the grand chessboard. There's the Azerbaijan connection between Iran and Russia, and Israel is kind of the odd. It's in an odd position. They have a lobby in the United States and they have the lobby in Russia as well. What's your take on the relationship between these two countries? And I don't even know how you begin to unpack, for our viewers, that relationship. But perhaps why hasn't Russia? Maybe we'll start off with, for people who don't really know anything about their relationship. Why isn't Russia taking a more aggressive posture towards Israel in light of a country who is supposed to be their ally, sort of, on their southern flank, getting, nearly destroyed recently? Why hasn't Russia done more to help Iran?
I think it's important to point out that they do have you mentioned their Jewish lobby, they do, or Israeli lobby. They do have an Israeli lobby. It's not as strong as ours. But I think it's also important to note that working in tandem with that Israeli lobby is two very strong Turkish and British lobbies. So with that in mind, and then we go forth. The Soviet Union had terrible relations with Israel for the bulk of its existence. Terrible, terrible. They didn't even have relations with Israel for about 30 years. By the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lot of these Jews from various places just ran to Israel. A lot of them aren't even Jews. They were just Russians that went and didn't want to stay in this collapsing Soviet Union. Russia inherits all the good and all the bad from the Soviet Union. So when people say, "Oh, there's 2 million Russians living in Israel," it's just 2 million Soviets. They're not 2 million. We don't know what they are. They're everything. They're mostly Ukrainians, actually.
Huh.
If you listen to the way Putin talks about this, he always refers to them as Russian speakers. They're not ethnic Russians. We have two different types of. We have Ruski, and they are your ethnic Russians that speak Russian. They have Rusnaya, which are your non-ethnic Russians that speak Russian, but are part of the Russian Federation. These people are Rusnaya. They're not Ruski. So they they're speakers. People of Donbass are ethnic Russians. It's a different relationship. There's also that hesitation that everybody has when encountering Israel. But then we get to the situation that we're in now. And the reason why it's important is because we have this axis that has formed over the last decade or so, probably longer, this Turkish, Azerbaijani, Israeli axis. It's a quiet axis. It's a weapons for oil axis. Both of them go through Turkey as an intermediary. The oil is supplied by Azerbaijan and the weapons are supplied by Israel. Israel actually supplied Azerbaijan with the weapons to ethnically cleanse Armenians. So it gets really, really hairy because Russia was on the side of Armenia in that conflict. So that's why your question is so great and everybody asks it is where does Russia and Israel end up when the chips fall? And I think that we're watching this now, and myself and my co-host Nara addressed this on our stream on Sunday, because this is kind of what everybody's talking about. And that's why I mentioned the bombing of the refineries. There's a huge tit for tat going on between Azerbaijan and Russia. And it has to do with Azerbaijan, the plane crash that happened in Azerbaijan. Russia suspects that Azerbaijan was involved in the helicopter crash that killed the president of Iran, President Raisi. And now we have these two terrorist attacks, the one in Ukraine with the box trucks, and then we have one in Iran with box trucks and drones. Both are said to have been involved Azerbaijan as well as Mossad and MI6. So that's the axis. I think Israel has chosen their side by default. And we've also seen Azerbaijan begin to make overtures to Ukraine. I observe Azerbaijan as a proxy of Turkey and Israel. So when it's acting in these sort of oddities, they're doing that at the behest of other people. So if they're making overtures at Ukraine, they're the fuel supplier for Israel. And then Russia bombs the fuel farms that are supplying Azerbaijan to supply Israel. I think it's kind of clear to see where the chips are falling. Russia has a concern for the Russians in Israel, but they're not going to come before the mainland. That's just never going to happen.
Yeah, that would make sense. I'm sure there's a lot of other examples, in war where you have a diaspora of people in a country that you're in opposition to. And so I can totally understand that. Thanks for that explanation. That was great. So how does the relationship with Iran factor in, and why were the Iranians perhaps so reluctant to accept the Russian help? Is this just general stubbornness, wanting to do it yourself? Kind of like us preppers wanting to, be self-reliant, or is there something more to this historically? Because I did notice that at the military parade this year in Moscow, there wasn't an Iranian presence. There was, I think, a couple of generals, but there was no political
Gotcha.
presence. And I thought that was odd at the time. I was like, wait a minute, aren't these guys supposed to be signing this defensive pact? What's your take on the relationship between Russia and Iran then? Where does it stand at this point?
It's funny you said like us preppers, because I think that's a good way to look at it as Iran's like, I don't want to get involved with anybody now because when everything hits the fan, I want to be able to make the decisions on my own. This has been a policy that Iran has had since the 70s when the revolution happened. It's a policy of no military involvement with others. They don't make military pacts that require an exchange of troops or an exchange of they don't want to be stuck in anyone else's military alliance. They don't want to, and so in this case, they were actually offered, or we can actually back it up even further with the jets. The jet exchange was a big mess because of both countries were hesitant about what the West would think. Iran lacks liquid currency very badly, so that fell through. And then they were offered an ironclad agreement, this almost to the same tune as the one that North Korea got from Russia, and Iran declined it. And they declined it because they didn't want to put Iranian boots on the ground in Russia. And that's one of the requirements. You exchange the manpower, and
Right.
and it's understandable that Iran didn't want to do that. Not only that, Russia ratified it in January, and Iran didn't ratify it until after the parade that you mentioned. So it's very strange that they do drag their feet. I don't think that it's a personal or a distrust. I think that it does come a lot from that self-sufficiency. We don't want to be dictated to. We don't want to be. They're very, very astute in their faith. They don't want anything to interfere with that. And I don't know if they regret it or not, but it's just a policy that they have. They just don't want to be roped into anybody else's conflict or foreign policy.
Now, obviously, they perhaps have less options, and so they're being forced into reconsidering this alliance.
I think they're going to push forward towards China. I think right now that's more advantageous for them anyway. And I actually think Russia might agree. Russia is forging a really strong relationship with North Korea. China is lessening their relationship with North Korea and pushing forward with Pakistan and Iran. And I think that both of these are really good moves. China has a very vested interest in Pakistan as a counterweight to India, and Pakistan supports Iran as well. So they've been talking about military deals, and I think that this is a very sound alliance that makes more sense for Iran than an alliance with Russia. Iran needs to be in a strong alliance with somebody who really isn't beholden to the West at all. And Russia still is in a cultural and historical sense. So I think this is advantageous for them, and they're going to get some Chinese jets, and I think that'll be good. And I think that the other deals have kind of fallen to the wayside. The air defense and the Su-35 deals from Russia have sort of fallen to the wayside, and they're still exchanging. They have an agreement in the fields of science and stuff like that, so they're still exchanging knowledge and a military, uh, a military knowledge and technicalities and stuff like that. So
But why is Russia against Iran's ability to, have nuclear weapons and essentially is what it would be, but enriched uranium? Why is Russia
oh, that
against that?
wasn't that was addressed by the foreign ministry of Russia. That was false,
Oh, okay.
thankfully.
Hmm. Now
Came
you
out in
went on a
Axios.
you went on an epic rant on Jamal Thomas about how the Iranians completely dropped the ball by, not making a choice in terms of whether they want to be a non-nuclear state or, don't enrich uranium to 60%, just either get the bomb or don't. That was your argument. Could you maybe just expound a bit on that? Because I thought that was quite, eloquent the way you stated that.
As I
And
was yelling.
that was good. Good energy. Love the energy.
Well, I mean, you have these states like North, and I love to use the example of North Korea. Why don't we like North Korea? We don't like them because they don't listen to us. So be ungovernable, I think, is the lesson here. And so, you have North Korea who saw what happened in the Korean War, and that's a war not enough people know about, but they were almost decimated. And they said, we're not going to do a bomb. We're not going to do a bomb. We're not going to do a bomb. We're testing a bomb. Like, that's exactly how you should do it. China knew they were getting a bomb. They had the support of their allies. They had a support system there. And Iran played this strange little, we call it like this cat and mouse game, or like this
Right.
like coy little, I mean, we could enrich the uranium. We're going to go to
Like a Persian
60%.
cat.
That's exactly what I was going to say, but you did inform me.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's very like, ooh, I don't know, maybe. And it's like the United States does not do well with that kind of stuff. Like, you threaten the United States and they're already paranoid. So I'm not sure. And I was like, just build the bomb, just build it already. And now it's too late. And we discussed this over the last 2 years with the genocide happening in Palestine. We discussed building the bomb and how you need this deterrence. And that's what the bomb is. And even when you go back and read these policy papers, and I wonder if the Iranians read them, but I read American policy papers all the time. And it even says in them from 2009, the path to Persia, it says, we don't want them to get a nuclear bomb. We don't think that they're going to use it on us. We actually absolutely don't think that. We just don't want them to have the audacity that comes with having a nuclear bomb. We don't want them to have that confidence. We need to be able to keep them down. And so, like, if you read that and that's their reason for you not having a bomb, I would say we're going to build this bomb because they don't want us to have any sort of regional influence. And that's what they're doing to Iran is they're isolating it. We mentioned Azerbaijan. They're talking about extending the Abraham Accords all the way to Azerbaijan to further isolate Iran. If they had a nuke, they wouldn't be doing this.
And so Iran persists in the same policy, it appears, where they're teasing that they could potentially continue to enrich. They haven't renounced their desire to enrich uranium, and their policy hasn't changed at all, despite what has happened here. So, where do you see that situation going? Is this going to be put on ice for a while, or is this going to be something that rekindles right away, or maybe in this 50-day window? I've suspected that maybe the U.S. and Israel have more plans for Iran within this 50 days. Where do you see them going in terms of a policy shift? Because clearly they still have a lot of this enriched uranium. I was talking to Ted Postal the other day, who makes a very good case that the Fordow attack was unsuccessful, and so they know they still have it, but they're still playing the same game, and they know they can't trust the U.S. now. They've continued to close their airspace at night, expecting an attack. What do you expect to happen in Iran? Do you think there's going to be another round of hostilities?
I do. There's still Mossad cells operating in Iran. They're still being found out almost every day. There's still explosions constantly in Iran. Israel is fantastic at sort of doing this. Look over here while we prep to do whatever it is over there. So they're opening up the Syria front. But I do 100% believe that something will be happening to Iran. While Bibi was in his very long meeting with Pete Hegseth, there were assets moving all over the place in the Middle East. So something is there's something kinetic happening in the Middle East, but for right now, and this is what I noticed Israel has done a lot of is when while we're awaiting the big stuff, they'll start to do all of this sort of little stuff or opening up these strange little
Yeah, yeah.
fronts or incursions. So I do
Wow.
believe so, and they also are requesting that we bomb Yemen for them again. So that might happen as well.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like there's something about this date, September 1st. I just wonder why Trump selected September 2nd, I think, as the date as to when this ultimatum with Russia. It's also going to coincide with, I believe, potential reimposition of sanctions on the Iranians. And so there's some, overlap there between these things. I'm just wondering what they're anticipating is going to happen because we really could see a hardening of alliances after all of this. And I would expect that, there is more integration of Chinese weapons in Iran, but that could take quite a while unless you have the sheep-dipped Chinese soldiers operating the systems.
Well, the cool thing about that is the Pakistanis are trained on Chinese weapon systems and they don't mind going into Iran and operating them for them, where the Chinese may mind going in and operating for them. I think that the September date is strategic because that's the last month before the end of our fiscal year. So that actually matters a lot when it comes to tariff sanctions and those kinds of things.
Hmm.
So that has to do with it being in September. That's the last full month before the end of our fiscal year. I agree with the hardening of alliances. Something is happening. I know that you guys are preppers. Maybe you have more intuition than I do, but I just feel like something is about to break. Some dam is about to break, and I'm just not sure if that's the Ukraine front, the Iran front, or an opening of the Taiwan front. I just feel there's a shift somewhere.
It's definitely in crescendo, and perhaps it's a bit of intuition. I mean, I think it's ultimately we know that this has to end with some sort of kinetic exchange, or one side has to win, as I always say, and we're far from one side winning. Just like the Soviet Union collapsed, somebody had to be the top dog for, these tensions to subside, and that we're far away from that. It really, if there is some sort of internal collapse in the United States, that could cause them to back off on all these fronts. But I think that's probably not going to happen either. So I think we can expect things to culminate into what really will be, I call it day X, when finally you have the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans kind of openly fighting alongside each other in these various theaters. And there's that interoperability between the four to a certain extent or another that is significant in that it is, of course, contributing to NATO's galvanization. So, yeah, something big is definitely coming. And, who knows what it's going to look like? Is it going to just be an internal collapse, or is it going to be a full-blown nuclear exchange? I mean, what I've always worried about is when the conventional weaponry runs out and these nations who are nuclear armed are looking at these massive arsenals collecting dust, billions of dollars worth of weapons just sitting on the shelf. That's when you start looking at those alternatives, and people do crazy things when they start to feel as though they're going to lose.
I
So
agree.
that's the risk, is that the only way this ends is if somebody loses, but as that person is losing, that's when they pull out the wild cards.
I agree. I agree. And I actually thought about that the other day when I read the article about the depletion of the American air defense stocks. And I said, oh God, what'll happen when they run out of air defense missiles? But yeah, we're getting to that point. And like you said, that axes that are actually forming. And, I think people have this weird hindsight vision where they say, oh, World War II happened in like a 3 year period. It was a bing bang done, everything formed and everything. And it's like this stuff takes decades to like
Yeah.
come to fruition. And we're watching these axes form. And it's exactly what you said. I see the Russian, North Korean, China, Iran axis. There's another axis forming in the Balkans, the Serbian, Hungarian, Slovakian axis. I mean, we know all world wars start in the Balkans. So I have a very uneasy feeling. And I think that, and I've been watching polls, I think that most people have the same feeling, this very weird feeling of uncertainty, especially in North America.
And so, with that feeling of uncertainty, what are you doing? Because I've always, thought that most activists eventually become preppers because they realize the futility in trying to change the world. Uh, what are you doing to prepare for this eventuality?
Well, I already have my exit plan to get out of the United States that I'll probably enact before it even gets to that point. Um, I see the United States shifting somewhere that I just don't want to go politically into this sort of technocratic corporatocracy. I'm not, and this is just not the way that I want to live. So I already have my exit plan to go to the East. I don't know what advice to give people. I think it's very dependent on the person. I'm not a prepper. I have a crazy amount of admiration for you guys because you're so patient and pragmatic. But I just don't, I'm not, I just don't, I would drive myself neurotic. So I think it's just important to have an escape plan and understand like what could possibly happen. I don't foresee any bombs falling on us in the West. I mean, maybe in a nuclear way later down the line. I don't see any wars coming to us in the Canada, United States, maybe in Mexico. But I think that the war isn't just on that. It's mostly on your psyche. And the war starts to get fought against you by the people that are actually in power. And that's what I've really started to notice lately is that the war is on us, but the enemy is actually the state. And that's I'm speaking for as from the United States perspective. I don't know how things are going in Canada. So I think that for us, it's not really as we're running from violence. I think we're more like some people will wind up political refugees, very much so.
It's interesting you say that. One of our guests that we had on was Andrew Bustamante, who is a former CIA spy. And he said that he's trying to get out of the USA by 2026 for some reason as well, that he hasn't really fully elaborated on yet. And I'm hearing this from a lot of people to have an escape plan. I'm hearing a lot about there's a big market now for, how to get a passport to other countries. And people are really concerned that things are going to implode possibly into some sort of civil conflict in the United States. Do you think it could get to that point?
I do. I also think that there is going to be a schism that sort of forms between like the men and the machines. I don't know how to explain this, but
Yeah.
I feel like we're under attack by the likes of Palantir and Anduril, and now they're talking about border walls. And I'm like, you're not getting like a physical wall, you're getting like a biometric wall that's going to keep you in as well as keep people out. I do agree things are getting very dark. I think there's a chance at civil unrest. Again, I worry that there's no political will or that the powers that be won't even allow it. But we're getting to a breaking point in the United States for sure. Once we're getting down to the path where the government is telling you don't believe what your eyes and ears are telling you. We're telling you that it's not that. And once you get into that, things can really get out of hand very quickly. This is like newspeak 1984 type stuff.
Absolutely. Are you familiar with Hugo de Garis? Yeah, so he has his idea of the Terrans versus the Cosmos, and he thinks that in the not so distant future, now he wrote this book, I think 25 years ago, about how AI was going to bring about, like you're saying, a technocracy, and that there was going to be a resistance to that in the form of kind of these people like Luddite style resistance, but it might be masquerading as something else. Like it would be some other, identity issue or, racial issue or something. But it was all ultimately about a war against or, resistance to automation and to this technological oppression. I just thought that that was pertinent to what you're saying.
I agree. I think that the problem actually arises is that the I hate to call them capitalists, but the people at the top are just living off their capital and are automating everything without actually sharing the wealth of what automation actually, what the benefits of automation should actually be. It should be to work less and have more money to enrich your life, but they're kind of just hoarding the resources at the top. I wouldn't say that I'm a Luddite, but I agree with that sort of romanticism of the Luddites versus the new technology or the new ways of working. It's scary what these guys
It's,
are talking. It's scary to listen to Peter Thiel and Alex Karp in interviews.
it's rage against the machine incarnate,
Yeah.
right? It's interesting listening to Peter Thiel too, because he has some. I mean, I can't personally listen to the guy very long,
No.
but his geopolitical views are concerning. I suppose if he, to say the least, his take on Israel and what they're doing is very concerning, considering the level of capability that companies like Palantir have, and that they are basically allowing Israel to use, and for him to be so dismissive and flippant of any criticisms of Israel. I think I recently seen he was asked a question about it, and he said, "Well, they know best, and
Mhm.
there's no, you know, uh, no concern whatsoever that they're misusing the tech." It's that's where I think the technology in itself gets scary. Is not so much the technology itself, but how it's wielded and
Right.
how it intertwines with this global war that we're about to see. And that was, I presume that that was integral in these Operation Spiderweb, Rising Lion, all these things,
Yeah.
and that's only going to ramp up. And so if the US has this massive edge in AI and you're Putin and China, that brings another dimension into this, that you have a perhaps a brief window to preempt
Mhm.
that what could potentially be an insurmountable threat someday.
Absolutely. I know exactly the clip you're talking about. I've posted
Yeah.
it so many times that he says, we defer to the
Sketchy.
idea.
It's
We
very
defer to
sketchy.
them. We don't argue. And that's the sort of plausible deniability that both of them have employed throughout this. Alex Karp always says it's not the software that's evil, it's what people do with it. And it's like, okay, so we just sell it to whomever and then they're responsible for whatever happens to it after that. I agree. And I actually spoke in November of last year about AI in Russia. They're very scared of AI. Not in the sense that they think America's going to beat them in some race. They don't want anything to do with it. They're afraid it's going to destroy their traditions and their values and stuff along that line. So I worry with the Russians that they're a little bit hesitant to get involved in AI, and then that will actually cause them to be behind in this race. China's already ahead of us in this race, and but Palantir's trying to break into China right now as well. Palantir is going around the world just gobbling up so much stuff that pretty soon there won't be a country that isn't involved with them. So that's also an issue.
Well, the
The,
interesting
the,
thing is all these guys are preppers too. Like Peter Thiel, he actually invited me to speak at a conference about like, the future and, preparedness and stuff like that. So these guys are all worried about the end of the world. And so it doesn't inspire confidence.
no,
When I
no,
see the smartest, at least
it's
from hard science point of view, people prepping for the end of days, whether it's brought about by AI or some AI-induced nuclear Armageddon, you know, that's part of the reason why I prep personally.
that's pretty scary. I didn't know that they were preppers. So now I know that the
Oh yeah,
guys that
yeah.
hold the key to everything are prepping for the end of the world. That's not a
Yeah, he actually was back in the day. He said that he got eye surgery because he was worried about not being able to get a prescription for his glasses because, the shit had hit the
well,
fan. But that was just
Alex
one
Karp
of the
sounds
many.
This
things
is,
have
I
been
guess this is how these guys live. I mean, even Alex Karp said, my greatest fear is to be thrown out of a window by a white, anti-Semitic white nationalist. And that's how I kind of make my decisions. And it's like, that's not very rational to go.
interesting. It's
So,
very specific.
yes, oddly.
Yeah. Well, hey, Sarah, it's been great having you on today.
Thank you.
I would encourage people to check out DD Geopolitics on X, a great source of info. If you want up-to-date breaking news on what's going on. We didn't quite get to Syria today, but we're going to let that situation, I suppose, mature a little bit, and then we'll have you back to
Oh, that'd be great.
hopefully try to break that down, because I don't even know. I have no idea what's going on in Syria. I mean,
It's a lot.
it's the biggest clusterfuck,
It's-
in the world, I think. So we're going to need somebody to help us parse that apart. But thanks for coming out. And you have a Substack too, right?
Yes, DD Geopolitics on Substack. We have like 10 writers constantly coming out with new opinions, new ideas. Yeah, we're just having fun. Come join us. Everybody's welcome. No judgment. We're not communists. We're not fascist. We're everything and all in between. So there's something for everybody.
Good stuff. And I would encourage you. I know you have an exit plan, but it might not be a bad idea to just explore the Pacific Northwest. You guys have some excellent
Oh, it's so amazing up
vistas
here.
and country out there. That's a great place to bug out. Honestly,
It is.
It's
It
a
is.
place
This
you
is
could live
actually a
year
good,
round.
yep, it's a good place to prep. Thank you so much for having me. And we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Take care.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.